Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Solutions Pod. Today, we're going to be talking about an issue that is very important for not just the environment, but for our own health as humans on this planet. And it's an issue that doesn't get a lot of attention. And we're going to be talking to an organization that is trying to make issues like this more transparent and available for people to understand so we can be part of the change. And that is PEER. You can find them at peer.org. And on Twitter, they're at peer.org. They are the Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, a nonprofit alliance of government professionals dedicated to uphold environmental laws and values. Today, we're going to be talking to the Director of Science Policy, Kyla Bennett, who previously worked at EPA Region 1 for 10 years as a wetland permit reviewer and as the region's wetland enforcement coordinator. Kyla became involved with PEER in the mid-90s when she became a whistleblower herself. And Kyla has a PhD in ecology from the University of Connecticut and a law degree from Lewis and Clark School in Portland. And her familiarity with the science and the law and the inner workings of the state and federal government agencies have enabled her to assist in this process. So Kyla, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so first of all, the topic that we're going to be talking about today is a type of persistent chemical that doesn't really go away and kind of concentrates in the environment, and that is something called PFAS. And if you don't mind, just explain a little bit more about what that is and why it is such
Sure.
a big issue.
Sure. PFAS is an acronym for kind of a confusing term, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And it's a group of thousands of chemicals. Right now, EPA has on their website, I think 9,252 of them, last time I checked. Most people are familiar with two major ones, PFOA and PFOS. Those are considered what they call long chain PFAS. And the reason they've got chains is it's carbon and fluorine bond, which is the strongest bond known to humans. These things are basically indestructible, and that's why they're called the forever chemicals. And they were manufactured by accident, actually, back in the 1930s by companies like DuPont and 3M. And they realized that these chemicals provide great properties for non-stick. So they shed water, they shed stains, they shed oil. And so they started putting them basically in everything. So all of those, that Teflon pan that you use, all of those nonstick pans, those are all PFAS. But it's everywhere. These chemicals are ubiquitous. They're found in 99% of Americans' blood. They've been found in rain and snow in every continent in the world. They have contaminated our drinking water, our groundwater, our oceans, and our food chain. And because they're so indestructible and because they are carcinogens, it's a huge, huge problem, and probably bigger than DDT or asbestos or any of these other issues that we have dealt with in the past, simply because we still don't know how we can destroy these chemicals. And they are in everyday consumer products, and it's still legal for companies to continue to use them. So it's a pretty horrifying situation.
Wow, I didn't know it was nearly that bad. I read a few articles about the issue, in particular, one where these are being sprayed from planes. But I didn't know they were actually pretty much everywhere and in all of our blood. That's pretty disturbing. Wow. So do you think that maybe this is maybe one of the big reasons that cancer rates are going through the roof in the last maybe?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if you saw the news recently, past couple of weeks, but a study came out from Harvard School of Public Health. PFAS are in the turnout gear of firefighters, so the pants and the jackets and everything that they wear to fight fires. It keeps them dry, prevents steam burns, things like that. But firefighters are dying at an unprecedented rate of cancer. In fact, in 2019, 75% of the online duty deaths were from cancer. So they're not getting killed in fires, they're getting killed from their gear. Yes, this is definitely, PFAS tend to be associated with two particular types of cancer, testicular cancer and also kidney cancer. But there are a host of other health effects and other carcinogenic possibilities for all of these compounds. So it's very frightening.
Wow. Yeah, I've already pretty much gotten rid of all my Teflon pans, but I think I wasn't quite aware that this was one of those chemicals. Wow. So before we get into this issue that you've been working on recently related to the PFAS, I'm kind of curious what your story is. How did you get involved as a whistleblower? Yeah.
You mean, how did I get involved with Pure?
Yeah, how did you get involved with Peer? And I guess that involves a story of being a whistleblower. I'm kind of curious from
It is.
that side of it.
So I worked at EPA Region 1, which is at the Boston office. And one of the first cases I was given was the Sears Island case. Sears Island is a 940-acre uninhabited island off the coast of Maine. And the Department of Transportation up there wanted to build a port for wood chips. And it was stopped. Sierra Club had sued back in the 80s and it was stopped for a variety of reasons. And when I took over the case, because it came back to life again, we realized that they had filled acres of wetlands on the island without a permit. So we started looking into it. We didn't want them to build the port because it was such a sensitive habitat, and it violated the Clean Water Act provisions that would allow them, they were not able to get a permit legally given what they wanted to do. And there was also the fact that they had filled wetlands illegally. So it became an enforcement case. But my boss at the time, who was a political appointee under the Clinton administration, felt like the permit should go forward because the then Democratic senator in Maine, George Mitchell, was very pro-port. So my boss at the EPA told me that I should find a way to make the permit scientifically defensible and to let the permit go through. And I said, I'm not going to do that. And he said, well, if you don't do that, I'll find somebody who will. And I said, try me. And he took me off the case. So I found Pure. I called them up. We sued. I won. I'm giving you the Reader's Digest version here. And the island is still uninhabited today. The port was never built. It's still not safe, but we have at least stopped the project. And I stayed at EPA for several years after my whistleblowing experience there. It's not pleasant to be a whistleblower. You're kind of a pariah. But then Pure asked me to join them, and I did. And I've been with Pure now for 20 years.
Wow. That's really awesome. So I'm kind of curious, how often do people blow the whistle? And is it just government employees that you all protect, or do you have other people? Like I know there's, I guess the issue that I know of the most about is the fluoride issue, and the whistleblowers that tried to come forward got crushed so much by industry and I guess the government as well, that it wasn't until recently where the American Dental Association finally said, hey, wait, infants shouldn't have fluoride, so stop putting that in the water. You might want to filter the water because it's actually causing, brain damage and things. But
so Pure only does work with government employees, but we work with government employees at the local, state, and federal level. So we work with municipal employees, people on conservation commissions or boards of health. We work with state employees at divisions of fisheries or DEPs, Departments of Environmental Protection. Most of our work, I would say probably 2/3 of our work, is with federal employees. So EPA, Corps of Engineers, USGS, Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA, things like that. So mostly federal employees, but we do take state and local government employees as well. And I think there are a lot of people out there who could be whistleblowers and aren't. It takes a lot of courage to be a whistleblower, and it's really not fun. People who blow the whistle don't do it to become famous or make money. They do it because, they can't look at themselves in the mirror and allow certain things to happen. And so personally, I think every one of our clients is incredibly brave to do what they're doing. Peer does try really hard not to out our clients because retaliation is a real thing. But sometimes we have to, only with their permission, obviously. And so some of them are famous, like, or become famous, like George Luber, for example, was a client of ours, and he was a climate change. He was wanted to talk about climate change, or, you know, there are other whistleblowers like Linda Birnbaum. She wasn't a client of ours, but she was the one who left the NIH because they wouldn't let her say that PFAS caused cancer. So, you know, there are a lot of people out there. There are so many hardworking, competent, wonderful people in our government who are crushed every day by industry influence, by political appointees. And it's not one party over another. In fact, it was way worse under Trump, I'm not gonna lie. But Democrats have their share of whistleblowers and problems. This is not just a Republican issue. This is both parties, happens all the time. And we're there for any government employee working in the environmental arena who wants to come forward and blow the whistle.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I think a lot of people are missing. It's really frustrating to see environmentalists and health advocates kind of, let the guard down as soon as we have the Democrat Party come in, because then, you have, these corporations will continue to funnel, millions and millions of dollars into the lobbyists that just, their job is to push whatever agenda their corporation decided is best and most profitable. So if there are any government employees watching this who know about some issue that is affecting the environment or health, please get in touch with Peer if
Absolutely.
if you
And we're totally free, and it's totally confidential. So in other words, we don't use anybody's name. We try to keep our clients entirely confidential unless they want to be public. And sometimes they are. Sometimes we end up in court, but only with their permission.
I guess the story that that really caught my eye that I mentioned earlier is the PFAS being sprayed out of planes, or I know out of helicopters. How is this happening? I mean, I'm pretty sure this has to do with the pesticides that are being used in certain areas, which is bad enough as it is. But how are the PFAS getting in there also?
So it's an interesting thing, the way this happened. And if you'll bear with me, I'll tell you how this came to be, because it's kind of a funny story. I live in Massachusetts, and we're finding a lot of our towns have contaminated drinking water. And if you look at the Environmental Working Group, they have a really cool map on their website that shows all of the known contaminated areas with PFAS all over the country. You can click on each dot and it'll tell you how bad the contamination is and where they think it's from. It's a really great interactive map. But when I was looking at Massachusetts and these towns that were coming up with PFAS contaminated drinking water, I couldn't figure out why so many towns in the southeastern part of the state were contaminated. We're not near a Department of Defense facility, which are always contaminated with PFAS. We weren't near any kind of industry or a firefighting training facility because this stuff is in the fire foam. So why were the towns in southeastern Mass, including my own town, why was the water contaminated? And I started wondering what we had in common as this group of towns that other towns didn't. And I realized that we are the ground zero for triple E, Eastern equine encephalitis, which is a very rare but fatal, often fatal, mosquito-borne disease. So we get sprayed constantly from planes and also truck-based with these pesticides. So I asked the state if it's possible that there was PFAS in the aerial spray, in the pesticides. And they said, no. So I was like, okay, well, I don't believe you. So we tested, and we found PFAS in the pesticide that's used here in Massachusetts, which is called Anvil 1010. And I immediately called DEP and said, guess what? You were wrong. I was right. There's PFAS in here. And they called EPA. And to the credit of Massachusetts DEP, they took it very seriously. They were very, very concerned. They believed us. They ran their own tests, which confirmed our findings. They took it to EPA. EPA ran their tests, and they confirmed what we found. And this has opened up a can of worms. In fact, I was on the phone with EPA this morning. This has opened up a huge can of worms, because what happened is EPA discovered that they think that the PFAS is in the pesticide because of these fluorinated containers that the pesticide is kept in. And this frightening thing is that these containers, these barrels, are used for many, many pesticides, including herbicides, not just mosquito sprays, but including herbicides, but also for food. So the EPA has issued a subpoena to the company that makes these barrels to find out where they're being used. We don't know yet the extent of the contamination from these barrels, but it could be massive. So we unintentionally opened up a Pandora's box. But the thing that really makes me lose sleep at night is that this wasn't my job. You know, Pure is a small NGO. We don't have a lot of money. Every time you test one thing for PFAS, it's like $1,000. We don't have the money to be testing. And we tested it 5 times, the Anvil, just to make sure that what we were finding was real. This is not my job. This shouldn't be your job or my job. This is the job of the government. They're supposed to be keeping us safe, and they're not. And that's what's so frightening to me.
Wow. So it was just kind of something that you just happened to find out about. But if you hadn't happened to be looking there, it just would have kept going on and on for years, maybe.
Yep. And even now, I asked EPA this morning, you know, why, you know, because they did stop the sale of the Anvil 1010 that contained this PFAS, which is very unusual for EPA. But I said, well, what about all the other pesticides that are in these barrels? What about the food? Why aren't we stopping those from being used? And they said, well, we're still trying to figure out the extent of the problem, which scary. I mean, they're taking it very seriously, which is good. I'm glad this is happening under the Biden administration and not the Trump administration. We have that in our favor because they are taking it seriously, but it's very, very frightening to me.
Yeah. Is this, so you mentioned that this is also found in fire foam. So basically every time a fire is put out, this stuff is contaminating the whole neighborhood or something? So
that problem everyone is well aware of, and they're trying to take it out of firefighting foam. So the use of the fluorinated foam has decreased because you don't need it for every fire. A lot of fires can be put out with water. There are some more, chemical fires that need the foam, but they are trying to reduce the use of it. But yes, that's why airports are so contaminated with PFAS and all the wells around airports, because they use these fluorinated foams on airplane fires or gas fires that happen at airports. So yeah, it's the foam is, I think, the first thing that will get PFAS removed from it. But honestly, what needs to happen right now, EPA doesn't regulate any PFAS. They have an advisory out on the two most common, PFOA and PFOS. And again, remember, there's over 9,000 of them. So the fact that they're thinking about regulating 2 is a drop in the bucket. So they have what they call a lifetime health advisory of 70 parts per trillion. So this stuff is so toxic that we're measuring it in parts per trillion. So EPA says that over your lifetime, you should not be having 70 parts per trillion summed of these 2. But we've got thousands of these chemicals that are in our food, they're in our water, they're in our clothing, they're in our toothpaste, our mascara, our dental floss, they're everywhere. And what we want EPA to do is to regulate them as a class, because if we do it one by one, it's going to take us thousands of years. We need to regulate all PFAS, all thousands of them, as one class, and ban all non-essential uses of them.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the BPA issue, where it's like that there's many different types of alterations of that, I guess, core compound. Yeah.
And
Why?
that's,
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
no, that's exactly what these companies do. So Chemours, one of the companies that makes these chemicals, they have a billboard outside one of their factories that says, "Let's change the formula." And that's exactly what they do. Every time a state starts regulating, so states are way ahead of EPA on this, and hopefully that will change with the Biden administration. But for example, in Massachusetts, they regulate 6 PFAS. Again, a drop in the bucket. Now we've got 9,000 more to go, but they regulate 6 of the more common ones. And we have a MCL, a limit of 20 parts per trillion for a combination of those 6. And if your drinking water or groundwater is above that 20 parts per trillion, it has to be cleaned up. So every time a state starts regulating some of these PFAS, the companies just go make a new one that's got a slightly different chemical formula, and then they don't have to worry anymore.
Wow. It just seems so backwards. I think people in the future, hopefully, if humans like survive and can thrive, it's like they're probably going to look back at these days and just like,
Wonder.
wow, like, what was going on? Like all these people, they were giving themselves cancer, and like they were, because these issues affect everybody. It seems like these politicians and the government leaders and industry leaders have to be aware, like, this is
there are some Congress people who are fighting very, very hard to fix these problems. Michigan, for example, has an awful PFAS contamination, and Rep. Dan Kildee, is really working so hard to stop, PFAS use and contamination. If you haven't seen the movie Dark Waters with Mark Ruffalo, I would strongly urge you to watch it. He plays Rob Bilott, a real life, it's a docudrama, basically, the story of Rob Bilott, this great lawyer who was the one who exposed what DuPont was doing. DuPont poisoned 80,000 people in West Virginia with PFAS. And Dark Waters is the movie about how he discovered that and how absolutely horrific it was. I mean, when you read some of these old documents, DuPont, they actually sat around a conference table and decided that it would be cheaper for them to continue to kill people and poison the environment. And when they finally got caught, they knew that they would only get a slap on the wrist. So they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew they were killing people, and they didn't care because they were making money.
Yeah, I remember hearing that there was a documentary I saw about Walmart, and they at one point were storing a bunch of pesticides in their parking lot, and the sun would break those bags down, and is tons of environmental damage at wherever this was happening. And I'm thinking that they took the similar approach. It's like, well, we're only getting fined this amount, and to change our entire system is going to be, so let's just pay the fine.
We see that in car manufacturers too. You see those cases where they know that cars explode on impact because of the location of the gas tank or whatever. And they figure, okay, we can afford to kill 160 people before it's going to be too expensive for us to recall. I mean, this is the problem with the United States. Chemicals are innocent until proven guilty here. And often the burden of proving those chemicals guilty falls on small NGOs like PEER or citizens like you. And that's not right. In the EU, it's the other way around. Chemicals are guilty until proven innocent, and that proof, the burden of that proof, falls on the manufacturer. And that's the way it should be. So we need systemic change here.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. For those of you who haven't dug into this topic at all, just kind of compare the amount of chemicals, for instance, that are allowed in, I guess, like skin products here, and then compare it to like the EU, and it's amazing. It's like a small fraction that's allowed over there, and but it's not. Yeah, food too. I mean, I remember talking to somebody who specialized in this area with wine, and the amount of the amount of chemicals that are allowed in wine, like people think, oh yeah, it's mostly grapes that have been fermented, and that's sort of a logical thing to think about
Yep.
if you're drinking wine. But like the guy took out a book, like a book of thousands of different ingredients. And one of the really interesting things about it is that most wine isn't vegan. So there's a lot of people that I guess would be shocked and horrified to find that information
Yep.
out.
Yep.
But it's not just that. I mean, that's like, for me, like what am I able to do in life and not get like a moderate level of poison? That's the main reason that drove me to go organic whenever I can. I'm really curious. So for those of us that are I guess a little newer to the specific topic of PFAS, I guess I knew about the firefighting, and I guess that sort of takes the headlines, and so I assumed that, oh well, that's the main problem. I didn't realize I was cooking with it too. But what are the main sources that people can, or what are the main things that people can do to avoid it? Are there water filters that can get rid of it in the water? You mentioned water. Like, is it on all floss, or does it just happen to be so pervasive that it's pretty much everywhere?
So there are things you can do, and there's if you go on any search engine and search, PFAS free products, there's a website that will come up that has a bunch of PFAS free products. EWG's Environmental Working Group also has a list of PFAS free products, or you can just search PFAS free dental floss. So for example, I use Desert Essence, which doesn't have any PFAS in it. Companies are slowly starting to, like Amazon promised that they're not going to have any cookware with it after sometime this year. Home Depot and Lowe's have promised to take it out of carpets. It's in carpets because it's a stain resistant thing.
Wow.
Scotchgard, that stuff you spray, that waterproof, that's pure PFAS. Cross country ski wax. So all you have to do when you're shopping is put in PFAS free and then whatever it is you're looking for. And sometimes they're more expensive. Like I just bought rain gear because my rain gear is falling apart. Most Gore-Tex is PFAS. That's what Gore-Tex is. They're one of the big companies. So I just bought a bunch of new rain gear. It was crazy expensive, but hopefully it'll last me 10 or 20 years, from Jack Wolfskin, which has all PFAS-free products. H&M, which is a cheap clothing store, none of their clothes has PFAS in it. So some of the companies are starting to respond to consumer demand. So you can find stuff. I try to avoid all plastic because we think it's probably in 20% or more of our plastic, which is leaching into your food. So I try to buy everything in glass bottles instead of plastic bottles, or buy bulk, or whatever I can do to avoid plastic. And sometimes it's really hard because of convenience. It's even Sharpies and Post-it notes have PFAS. It's crazy. So when you're tested, when we do tests for PFAS, because Peer tests a lot, we were the ones who discovered it in artificial turf too, on playing fields. You have to be so careful. You can't use conditioner in your hair. You can't use insect repellent, sunscreen, rain gear. You can't use Post-it notes. You can't use Sharpies. You can only use Ziploc bags for plastic. I mean, there's all sorts of rules about what you can and cannot use because of the contamination issue, because it's just everywhere. But it's so, so dangerous for us. This is, in 10 years, people are going to look back on this and think, what were we thinking? Why did we do this? Because these things are indestructible. And as far as water filters, yes. If you search NSF, and I can send you some of these links afterwards if you want, so you can post them somewhere, but NSF certifies water filters to remove PFAS. So I've got one in my sink and also in my shower because it's dermally absorbed as well. Lucky us. So I have one in my kitchen sink, and I make my coffee. I feed my dogs water from that filter. I make my ice cubes from that water. Everything that we cook with, we use the PFAS-free water. And then I have a filter that filters it out from my shower as well.
Yeah, those links would be very helpful. And for those watching, I'll put those in the show notes to this episode. Yeah, it would be really nice if I think some people think that when they see a California cancer warning, it's being blown out of proportion. But personally, I would feel a lot more comfortable if there were warnings like this has PFAS, this has this, but it's just out of control.
It
So
is.
I'm kind of curious. So this is something that like it's not really possible to detoxify your system once it's in there. It's just kind of there, right?
So yes, and the half-life for some of these PFAS are 12 years. So they're going to, once they're in your body, they're in your body. But there was one study I read fairly recently that said eating a lot of fiber will help remove PFAS from your body more quickly. But here's the kicker, and this is hard for a lot of people, partially because of money and partially because of availability. You really should be eating organic foods. And the reason I say that is biosolids contain vast amounts of PFAS. So for those of you who don't know what biosolids are, when wastewater treatment plants collect all the sewage and dewater it, and then they put the water, out into through a discharge pipe, the sludge that they're left with, they dry it and they sell it as fertilizer. And that sludge, those biosolids, have tens of thousands of parts per trillion. Now, remember, according to Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who used to work at NIH, she said 0.1 part per trillion of just one of these, PFOA, is carcinogenic. So we're talking about tens of thousands of parts per trillion in these biosolids, and they are sold and given away for fertilizer that people use on their crops. Organic farms are not allowed to use those. So I just do not eat vegetables or fruits that are not organic. I just don't do it anymore because there's too much PFAS in that food.
Wow. Yeah, it's I guess it's really hard to get away from everything. I think that you just really have to do your best, because I mean, to me, it's kind of mind blowing that they can even just mass spray, for insects. It's like, can't we just choose if we want to spray this stuff, which by the way, I guess has the PFAS in it too. So if you're spraying the stuff on you, you're breathing it in, going directly to your lungs. But why why do you think that these policies are allowed to continue, where like consumer protection is just such a secondary issue? Like obviously the corporations have so much power, but
that's it. That's it. You
Okay.
hit the nail on the head. Our system is broken. The way we deal with chemicals in the US and how they get approved for use is broken. That system is broken, and it has been broken for decades. On top of that, during the Trump administration, industry really infiltrated agencies like EPA, and some of those people are still there. And that's not going to go away anytime soon. I don't know how the Biden administration is going to root all of those people out, but they should. So the whole, if you look back, or especially over the past 4 years, the whole anti-science movement and the both sidesism, that, people who think that they can Google something and that what they find on Reddit or some QAnon site is just as valid as a Harvard researcher. It's really, really hard, and companies are taking advantage of that, and they manufacture doubt. That's what they do. They hire these consulting firms, the same ones that helped out the tobacco industry when scientists finally discovered that tobacco smoking causes cancer. What they do, they, instead of saying, "Oh my God, we've got to stop making this, we're killing people," they hired, scientists for hire. They hired PR firms, and they tried to manufacture doubt, and that's still happening to this day. So what people need to realize is just because something is legal doesn't mean it's safe. And you're right, there's so much out there, it can become overwhelming. So it's a matter of just minimizing your risk. Don't use nonstick pans. The only things that are safe are cast iron or stainless steel. I don't use anything else. Just be careful. You can use your purchasing power, ask questions, and don't trust what people tell you. Like when we write to manufacturers and say, "Is there any PFAS in here?" They'll say, "We are PFOS free." Well, PFOS is one of the over 9,000 PFAS. So they use semantics. They try to snow you, basically. So you have to educate yourself, and you have to be firm, and you have to trust your instincts, and don't trust everything that people tell you. Trust independent scientists, but don't trust the manufacturers. That's how I run my life.
Yeah, and I guess when you were talking about the, trusting like actual research, scientific research, I'm kind of curious how you would suggest going about understanding if certain scientists are basically taking industry money. Is there like are people keeping track of this to where, because I know for a long time, like fluoride was getting buried because they were paying so many researchers on top of all the like movies and ads they were putting on. I mean, they were literally making, people that were speaking out look like these ridiculous conspiracy theorists. Meanwhile, putting out science that had been basically falsified, or they cut the study off after the first 2 years and just like, put a stamp on it and said, okay, we're good, it's safe.
Yeah. So when a scientist publishes something in a peer-reviewed journal, they have to disclose conflicts of interest. So what I always do when I don't know if you're familiar with Google Scholar. It's a great little part of Google where it's just patents and scientific articles. They also have case law in there, but it's just pure science. The first thing I do when I find an article, before I even read it, I check the names. You can just click on the names of the authors and it'll tell you where they're from. If they're from DuPont and 3M and Chemours, I don't even bother reading the article because those are paid industry scientists. If they're from the Harvard School of Public Health and the University of Chicago and Mount Sinai Hospital, then I'll read it. And then and then at the bottom, there's a conflict of interest statement where the authors have to say whether or not they've accepted money from the industry. If you're reading an article about how dairy doesn't cause cancer and it's sponsored by the dairy industry, don't believe it. You just have to do that extra little bit of research and figure out who wrote what you're reading and what their contacts are. And all of that should be in the article.
Yeah, and I don't want to throw any particular universities under the bus necessarily, but aren't there certain universities that might be more prone to getting like a lot of support from certain industries that might like be less trustworthy, or are there certain like really solid ones that or maybe that's just me being a little bit paranoid because there's just so much going on with this and
there's a lot of industry and government money in science, and not all of it is bad. So I would be hesitant to say, don't read anything from this university. But I do always check the affiliations and where the money came from. Because, it's very unusual for an industry to write a paper saying what we're making is killing you. So, I just go author by author rather than university by university.
Yeah, that's really important. And I think we're definitely going to have to team up on this because there's just so much to dig through. And I guess for those of you who are watching who this is a really stressful topic, I just want to remind you that our bodies are, designed to be able to survive and get rid of things. And I think the worst thing you could do is be really, really stressed out about this and add that on top of, the issue. So just, I guess, doing our best to inform each other and avoid the major sources of this where we can. And I kind of wanted to ask you about some of the recent freezing that has been done of some of the rules from the Trump administration. And what's going on there?
Well, I think it's great. I'm thrilled that he's doing that. And in fact, I don't know if you noticed, but they actually revoked the approval of one of the PFAS that came out under the Trump administration, which was great. They are reviewing a lot of the rules that happened over the last few months of the Trump administration, but there's a whole lot more that they're going to have to do. They just want to make sure that there wasn't political interference, or that there, a lot of the rules that and executive orders and things that Trump did were not based on the best available science. Some of them were purely politically driven, and the Biden administration is doing its best to prevent those from moving forward, which is great.
Wow. So basically, so they were trying to push new PFAS as if there's not already enough.
Yep. Yep.
So I'm really curious, how how can people like me and people watching, how can we best um, support your movement towards solving a lot of these problems? Like, I guess on an individual basis, and then also how can we specifically support you and your work?
I think generally, the more that people know, the more educated they are about these issues, and the more they speak out about them. I would urge everybody to contact your state and federal reps and tell them that all non-essential uses of PFAS have to be eliminated. We have to hold the Biden's EPA's feet to the fire on these issues and make sure that they act strongly. So, register to vote. If you're not registered, contact your reps and make sure they're aware of your concerns, and see if you can get state reps to start taking some strong actions. There are, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, have some very strong laws already on the books that other states can copy and use. There are some states that have no laws on this, like Florida. um, so push your state to start doing something about this. So education is the most important thing. Once you're educated on the issues, you can push it with your legislators. As far as supporting peer, follow us on Twitter and Facebook and share what we post and get the word out, because never underestimate the ability of a group of people to make change, because we as Americans have purchasing power. And if everybody starts saying we demand PFAS-free dental floss, it's going to happen. If you just stop buying the dental floss that has PFAS, it's going to get removed. So you have to be vocal with the manufacturers and the companies and say, we don't want this. We want PFAS-free stuff. We want toxin-free stuff. And tell your friends and your family and everybody you can to do the same thing. And that's what's going to make the difference. I think that'll be quicker, even though how scary is that, but that'll be quicker than waiting for EPA to do something. Sadly.
Yeah, that's right. It is something that we can set off a chain reaction. And well, I'm kind of curious, how can, so people can find you best at peer.org. That's
Mhm.
right. And then,
Yep.
so if people did have extra money to donate, that's something that would be helpful for you as well, right?
Absolutely. I hate asking for money, but yeah, we are a nonprofit. We only have about 14 people nationwide. We have offices in California, Colorado, Tennessee, Florida, and Massachusetts, and then our headquarters, which is right outside of DC. But we are lean and mean, and we could always use money. And there's a donate button on our website. But just as important as donating is just spreading the word. Education is so important, just the knowledge. If people know and understand what's going on, they can make noises to their congressionals, because that's what ultimately will make a difference.
Okay, yeah. And I'm also curious, so are you looking for volunteers, or are there like certain types of people that you're looking for to join you?
We occasionally take volunteers. I work with, it's funny because like with the firefighters, that's one of our issues, and the PFAS in their gear. And I'm working not only with firefighters, but with their wives and their friends who are not public employees, but they're providing us with great information and research, and just, marketing, making videos and spreading the word and tweeting. So we can always use help with stuff like that. But also, if you know government employees who are facing some kind of environmental issue that they think needs to have the whistle blown, by all means, contact us, because we may be able to help you.
Okay. And everybody, if you are on Twitter or on social media, definitely go and boost up their content, and go check them out. And if you have any extra money to spare, this is such an important issue, and it's just and it's not just the PFAS. There's so much work that is being done by Peer, and we're just so appreciative of you spending the last 10 plus years on this, and so many others in your organization. I guess real quick, is there a way that people who aren't on Twitter can follow you on Instagram and Facebook? Are those the main other social media ones?
Yep. We do have a Facebook account and Instagram, although Instagram isn't as active as Facebook and Twitter. But yeah, we're there, and we're in the newspaper a lot too. So just search for us and you'll find us.
Okay, and we're going to try to get you up on naturehub.com too, which by the way is the sponsor of this. And yeah, so this has been such an awesome talk with you, and I hope to have you on at some point in the future to discuss some of the other issues as they come up, and hopefully we'll have like some victories in this area that we can talk about, because this is not the funnest topic to talk about, but it's so important to spread the word about this. So Kyla, thank you so much for being on today. And
thank you so much for having me. I'd be happy to come back anytime. Thank you.
All right, well, have a good one, and everybody out there, we'll see you next time, and make sure you go to peer.org.